Tuesday. This is a special meeting to discuss library process. We've invited Dick Reed and Cynthia, I forget your last name. Lovenstein, to come in with us and discuss where we think, they think, everything is and how maybe things could or should proceed at this point. There's no real set means of how we want to discuss things or process is as much as a free flow exchange of ideas and thoughts and recommendations. So, special meeting to discuss library process. Wow, I heard that before.
Really?
Now we know what the delay is.
The Back to the Future meeting.
Yeah, Back to the Future. Okay, what I thought I'd do here is, at this point, I think I'd like to turn this over to you for any comments that you'd like to make at the very start, and then we can sort of work through it as well.
That was good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I get this well over here.
Well, I want to thank you for inviting us here. We certainly have a lot of ourselves invested in a library for the town, and if appropriate, would like to bring our resources and experience to continue, if appropriate. So, Cynthia and I both thought that we were coming here to sort of find out what you thought was appropriate.
Okay.
What other than what we've already done seems, I know a little bit about cost reduction, which might be size reduction, and I could talk about a process by which that could be a process by which you might accomplish that size reduction, cost reduction, if you wanted. That would be a logical next step if the goal is to reduce the size of the project.
Well, we're trying to operate within we're trying to create a budget that we can operate within. We haven't made any final decisions. It's sort of a range at this point. I think I said 2.8 to 3.5. As we progress, we probably want to narrow in on something. Of course, some of that, and we haven't really explicitly stated how much should be raised by public funds and private funds, but that we know that it's probably going to be somewhere around the 50-50 mark, at least for our initial arguments. We haven't yet to bring in the Capital Campaign Committee again. We know that they need to be involved much earlier. We're also looking for some people to help us in getting the message out, for lack of a better term right now, marketing. And I need to say I'm kind of a little under the weather, so if I start to drift off on things, it's because I'm thinking about 3 different things, and probably 2.5 of them are unrelated to what we're doing tonight. But we do know that. We also know that repeatedly people have brought up the issue of parking, and the big complaint that we heard, and for some reason we just completely blew it away, was the exterior appearance. And I'll say from my perspective that virtually no one that I spoke to had any complaints about the interior arrangement. A couple suggested it was too small, and a couple suggested it was too big. Those are that's within the range, but the layout and everything, the way the process worked to get that arrangement, all seemed to be working very fine. Now we need to figure out how we can bring this to the voters, not in June. We've already said we're not going to try to get anything onto the warrant in June, but either in November, if we can make that progress, or the following June, 2018. Those are sort of the broad parameters of where we want to go. Obviously, to change the layout or to shrink the size will involve changing the layout. I know our librarian here has voiced his opinions that if we shrink it a lot, the best way he thinks that we can shrink it is by eliminating the second story, which eliminates all those things that you need to get up and down. But again, we haven't made those decisions. We really need to go back to the expert. And how can we approach this to make this work as well as B, Rockport's library. Jeff? I'm gonna let the rest chime in here too.
Yeah. I think also, to be fair to Dick and his whole team, and I say this with tremendous respect for what you've done and what you can do in the future. I think one of the things that this meeting might want to dwell on for a little while is sort of a de novo introduction to you and your firm and what you've done, because you appeared very thoroughly to the ad hoc library committee, and this is a whole new body, and it seems to me to be a natural opportunity for this body to both get to know you, and then the possibility exists that this body might go on and decide to take a look at other firms as well. So it's with no rancor or anything else. It's just you might want to tread over some stuff that you've already done with the ad hoc library committee, but because this is a new relationship, you might want to touch on that as well.
Okay, that's it. Want me to start there or respond?
As you please.
Ken, Brendan, or Owen, do you want to have anything else to say before?
I just had one other short point, if not a minor point, which is that I think we have initiated a process which is a little bit different from the experience you had with the Ad Hoc Library Planning Committee, in that we have a greater emphasis on paying attention to what we believe will pass early on in the process. And I say that in contrast to what any one individual or this group believes is necessarily the best library. I hope that we are bringing considerable focus to getting this done correctly this time, and that, to my way of thinking, implies some level of compromise about what might be the best.
And I guess, like Bill said, we haven't necessarily made any final decisions yet. We did talk about a budget, and we kind of polled the whole board, and the 2.8 to 3.5 number was an amalgam of what we all came up with, which was a little bit different, but we're all in the same neighborhood. Ben did some work for us in shrinking the square footage a little bit with his suggestion, and part of that was, as I think Bill said, talking about going from 2-story to 1-story, but that's a decision that I think rests more properly with you guys. But in our decisions, we talked mostly about the budget, and we talked about the parking issue. And so I guess at some point, it would be good to know from you if we're totally out to lunch. Can we do this for 2.8 to 3.5? Can we build a new library for Rockport? And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
And that may involve a conversation, perhaps we're here to listen to some conversation that you have or haven't had a chance to have with Ben. But, fundamentally, the programming that was identified the last time around is the correct programming. I believe we have a hard time coming up with enough support to fund that. So, there that is.
Yeah, definitely. The programs that we want to accomplish are paramount. The size that goes with each of them is the variable, as much as we could possibly accommodate.
I'm confused by that.
Oh.
In a sense, they're very interrelated. I mean,
Yeah, well-
the program is the size, basically. isn't
The programs that we want to offer
it? Right.
and how we want to offer them. Yes, you have to have so many square feet to be able to put in the fiction or the nonfiction. But when we come to the youth and the young adult, the children's, and some of the others, we need to make sure we're accommodating them. If we have to shrink, our stacks, then that may be a discussion that we have to have.
Right.
But we still need to be able to, and this is a very obvious exaggeration, but we still need to be able to offer fiction and nonfiction books to our public. So,
I think the process of sort of not talking about appearance or parking, but just size and budget, that interrelationship, I think it's a process of finding any efficiencies we can in terms of the plan, not duplicating and, if there's any shared use, which is kind of a process we went through. The other part of that process is looking at the collection, because the collection absolutely influences square footage, and then how you house the collection, the spacing of the shelvings, the height of the shelving. And I think, that would, no matter how you go forward, that's gonna be, if you're, whether it's one story or two story, I think that's gonna be a factor. So there's a process of the efficiencies, I think there are some efficiencies that could be gained in the plans that don't affect collection or program. But ultimately, you're gonna get into looking at the collection and how much and how little and how many square feet and the cost is an analysis that any continuance would have to go through. The other part of that is inclusion in program, what things can happen here versus there. I think in the process, one of the things that came along late in the game that was really desirable and we included was a space for a workshop for the Friends, for their book sale. That had a large impact in square footage. Somebody's got to make a decision, is that included or not included? So, there's some soul searching and tough any of those aren't necessarily easy decisions, but I think in all fairness, there is a way to give options that that the select board can make an informed decision about. If we reduce the collection by this much, this is the impact. If we include the Friends, this is, if we exclude the Friends, this is the impact. But ultimately, I think you're talking from where we were, one or two story, you're talking a pretty large, some cuts. And then, Brendan, your thing, the select board has a list of things that will make it pass, but it might not be a good library. That might be a rub for Cynthia and me, because our goal is to make a good library. I mean, really, and if we think you're not making a good library, we'll let you at least know, that you're making an informed decision because of criteria that we might not agree with.
I'll speak up on that too, if we get to that point.
Yeah, I'm sure you, and I respect that you will, and it will be. So, so what we did, Jeff, getting back to you, we kind of came on to the project after being selected and looked at the site carefully and had a goal of preserving Memorial Park. We did that, increasing the parking, we did that, improving the intersection to make it safer and for both pedestrians and vehicles in terms of the intersection, plus in terms of coming to the Opera House, we did that. We had, I may be exaggerating, but I think we had 6 different programs that defined 6 different square footage, or all the way from 6,000 to 12 or 14,000. We worked really hard at looking at the collection, the spacing of shelving. I mean, we really got into the weeds and determined that, around 8,000 was working for a while, but the young adult was felt to be too small, and I think it was too small, so we increased that a little bit. And then space for the Friends was very important, so we found a way to increase that. So we got up to a little over 9,000 square feet. That's what we did.
With the option on the third floor, too.
Yeah, we looked at that option. We looked at other options along the way. We looked at, different materials. But just in terms of a good library, that was the heavy lifting, I think. And it was interesting that ultimately it was disagreements over appearance that became the criteria or at least one of the criteria, and maybe a major criteria. But
Can you talk about that a little bit? When you say, was that at the ad hoc library planning committee level that you feel that
No,
came in,
the
or
planning
after?
committee was really, they were challenged, but they, brick versus clapboards, the, potential outdoor space on the third floor, could we, the roof pitch. No, I think they did an excellent job sort of representing community and trying. It was more from the 8 focus groups, kind of getting, all different opinions about what personal preferences were that were hard to respond to. And I think Cynthia and I were kind of trying to hear it. I mean, it may be to our credit, but it may be not. That we're always trying to find, the path through all of this, that consensus. I mean, that's that's typically what builds, the libraries we've had built require consensus, and we didn't get there on the appearance. I think we did on the size. I mean, people might have disagreed, but we worked really hard on the size and the program, including enough sharing space where it was appropriate, having space so that's what we brought to that table. If we're going to reduce it, our goal would be to, like I say, find efficiencies. Are there other things we could consider sharing? Are there other programs that could be located remotely? So, and that, I'll have to say, that's not an unusual process. A lot of times we do libraries, preliminary design, we come up with a budget, and 2 or 3 years goes by in the fundraising process. So by the time, and it may not even be totally successful. So it's not unusual for us that 2 or 3 years later, the dollar isn't going as far and the funds haven't been raised. So we go through a process of sort of pulling it in a little bit. And sometimes that's a very good process. You know, how much is enough is a good process. So, and I think anybody that continues to work on this is going to have to go through that process. I think we're qualified to do it, and we're familiar with the variables, but anybody would have to do that, go through that process.
Can I ask it's just like kind of a prompt, because I really wanted to go more along kind of Jeff's line. I knew about you, I interfaced with you all, but I didn't really get to spend as much time with you as like the library planning committee did. So what I'd like you to do, if you could, is since the vote failed, you've had just some time to possibly think about this project in a way that maybe describes a bit of your history and what you all have done as a company and where your mind went after the failed vote. Can you talk about some of the thoughts you may have had about this library? Maybe it made you think of another project you had worked on, or if I had gone about it in this way, maybe we would have gotten to a better exterior appearance, or...
You want to take, I was sort of surprised and honestly disappointed that the extra, our goal was to make a good library. I think whether it had square columns or round columns is insignificant. It's something we would probably work on detailing until it was built, or at least until the drop died. So the first, when I heard that one of the reasons it might not have passed was because of its appearance, I found that disappointing, because we certainly worked hard on the appearance. So, you know, after getting over initial sense of failure, I thought, well, you know, I don't really think, I don't think we failed. I think we accomplished a lot. The fact that the appearance, I think a good library will look like a good library if it's in use. I really do. And so, you know, and from the feedback we got, on 8 focus groups, I did a soul searching of, okay, so what did we learn from 8 focus groups? Somebody came up with, we ought to have an additional toilet. That was like the most positive thing to come out of 8 focus groups, and we added it. It was a good comment, and it's something we could respond to. But it was very difficult to respond to. It should have buttons or not buttons. It should have this and not. It should look old. It should look new. It should be brick. It should be clapboards, because those are all personal preferences. And you know, to me, the most important thing will always be, is it a good library? If it's a good library, people will love the way it looks eventually. You know, it's all going to be new, but it gets beyond personal preference and gets to be shared experience. And that's much more enduring than what the fashion of the day is in terms of, you know, Italianate revival or glass box and steel. Those things have an effect, but they're not as important as, is this a good library? You know, the word wow effect, you know, it didn't have any wow effect. And I took that to be capital W, capital O, capital W. The last library we did, so I'm going to try to answer your question by what we've done in the past, it was Cape Elizabeth. And I went there with my grandson, because they were having a robotics thing in the community room. This is after it's done. Probably the first time I'd been back after construction. And so, you know, I'm wandering around in there. There's a big group of multi-age people in the robotics. But you go into the building, it's got a big canopy, 17-foot high ceilings, granite stairs, granite lobby, you know, huge, beautiful light fixtures. And I'm walking around, but there was, you know, teenagers, young kids, you know, robotics people, you know, it was just people sitting at the furniture. That was my first wow, and it was a smaller case wow. It was like, wow. You know, it was like you designed a comfortable slipper or something. It fit. It really did. And they're in it. And So all of the wows of the granite and the canopies and the 17-foot ceilings didn't compare to the fact of how that library was being used on that day. And it was a Saturday, so it was probably a heavy-use day. But, boy, did that represent a community having a place to go and a good experience. And it spoke well for Cape Elizabeth, I thought. But it was, for me, the first really, wow, a quiet wow.
Yeah, Cape Elizabeth was one of those that went back and forth several times.
It was voted down once, I think.
Once, okay.
I think for me, the challenge also sort of happened at the focus groups. And we never really did focus groups like this before. We had, I think we had 8 focus groups in the period of 3 days. It was overwhelming. We got way too much information, and it wasn't in a way that was usable. So I think it actually maybe worked in the opposite effect,
Right.
where we got so much information. It didn't get filtered down to us about what Rockport really is, because we heard so many divergent things. And also, at one point, I asked people very directly, what did they want? And there wasn't any comment. Nobody wanted to talk about what they want. Everybody wanted to talk about what they didn't want. And so it became a dumping session, and that was really difficult. When you're creating something new, you're looking for constructive information about an idea or something. So the gestalt of who Rockport is and what this library is really going to be didn't happen at the focus groups at the way that I think it was intended to happen. And I don't know how you can do that better, or that's something I've wondered about since then.
And we struggle with that, I think, because going back to exterior appearance, talking to people around town, I had some people who I never in a million years would have expected that they would have gone for the 3rd floor roof garden design that you folks, and they said, oh, gee, I love it. I said, I wouldn't have expected that. Other people didn't care for it. Other people didn't care for the final design. Myself, when I saw the roof garden, I said, I'll have to get used to that. And when I saw the final design, I thought, oh, that looks nice, whatever. But I think part of what we may have to do as a board moving forward is to impress upon people what you have said, which is that the library is what works on the inside, how it functions. And I remember going through the process saying, well, if everybody liked the interior, the exterior, it seems to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that's easier to fiddle with and to change around once you've agreed on the interior space and the design and things like that. I mean, obviously you have some limits, but, and I think maybe we have to improve our messaging with that and making sure that, because the picture everybody saw was the picture of the exterior. And maybe we need to show more pictures of the interior and people doing just what you said at Cape Elizabeth, sitting at tables and doing work and how it works or something like that, and letting people know that, what, if you like the way the interior looks, the exterior, we can work with that. So that's just my comment.
So one of the issues that you're hearing, obviously, is that this board has a learning curve that we need to get as well, as knowledgeable as the ad hoc library committee did in less time. So to that end, we spent 8 weeks of organizing meetings of people in town who are engineers and builders, what have you, too. We took it so far back as to consider both sites again. And that was important for us because it gave us a vocabulary, it gave us the ability to, on some certain things that people took for, as gospel, oh, it's more expensive to do X. Well, it turns out it's not, it's about the same, blah, 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 blah. But along those same lines, if you have anything that we can learn from it, it sounds as though, in a sense, because you've mentioned the focus groups, as almost being an entirely different client, if you will. That either Rockport's different or the focus groups are different than you've had in other communities, or you haven't had to do those. And we need to learn from that. And so do you have anything about client relations? Because obviously the easiest client is one person, and having a board is like, oh my God, and then having the whole town it may or may not be crazy.
We're used to working with committees, so we believe in that. So that was not the issue at all. The town I compare it to like trying to design a house for a couple that's going through a divorce. Seriously. I think the town needs mediation. I really do. I think before you kind of run this up the flag another time, there needs to be some serious mediation. You know, there needs to be a coming together and defining some, I mean, Brenda, you said that you know what would pass. I'd be surprised if something doesn't deal with the acrimony, how anything could pass here. I really, we've been lucky. I'm surprised because almost all of the libraries, I mean, there might be some little contention here, but they're very popular projects in the communities we've worked in. And for this to be I don't know if it's a source of the acrimony or a victim of it, or both, I don't know, but something, this is a really kind of hostile environment to design a library in. And the easiest thing to pick on was appearance, because it's totally irrational. You know, nobody in the focus groups was talking about, other than the man that thought we needed another toilet, was really like working the real stuff, you know? It was all personal opinion stuff.
And I just want to build on that, and I promise. Have you ever done something similar to that, where there was a large, diverse group of folks, to where you were able to synthesize that information down by conducting it differently, by having a different process? Because it's one of the things that we struggle with. We definitely want the citizenry to be engaged and involved, but it has to get whittled down to something that actually means something to you in the architectural process. So, I mean, have you experienced something similar to where it actually did work well?
I've been in, not in the library, I've been involved for quite a few years on affordable housing on Peaks Island. I'm not anymore, and that was incredibly contentious on the island. And what they've finally done is they've brought in a sort of a mediator, and they've had, from what I'm told, I didn't attend, I don't live there anymore, but they're working on the zoning, and they had lots of information sent out ahead of a large meeting, and they did some meetings, and at the end of the meeting, everybody up and applauded, and it's the first time that's ever happened on Peaks Island to the person's knowledge. And I think that's, you know, something has to happen that everybody can applaud, or not, you know, everybody's a big word, but, you know, it's the applause we didn't find in our 8 focus groups.
And I'm sorry, then I interrupted.
Oh, no, you didn't interrupt. I mean, the focus groups, I think they were good as far as letting a lot of people see what we had done up to that point. But as Dick and Cynthia have been saying, for everything we heard somebody liked, we heard somebody say they didn't like. So trying to find a path through that was there. Yeah, it was a bit impossible. I mean, we just had to sort of keep forging ahead on best principles and best practices and what we were doing, because literally everything that got brought up, somebody either loved or hated, and it, you know, it was really hard to say, oh, well, what's the average here? Going forward, well, I guess we can stay with what we've got, or you go one way or you go the other way. But even during that process, for the most part, that was all focused exteriorly. The interior of the library we designed, whether it was too big or too small, worked really well. And I mean, I credit these two people here. I hadn't gone through the process before. I learned a ton. But it worked. I mean, that building worked. And I have full confidence that if we have to pare things down or do things, that we'll figure out a way to make a good library. And again, if we get to the point where we're not, I'll let everybody know, because, you know, I don't know how many libraries I'm going to be part of building, and I don't want my name stuck on one that isn't good. So, I mean, I just really want to be in a good library. That's part of who I am. I love these things. So when it comes to the interior, it worked really well, and I kept trying to get people to focus on that. I'm just a form over function type of person. I don't really care what the outside of things look like as long as they work, you know. But that's just me. Function over form. Sorry, backwards. Thank you. You know, it doesn't matter to me. So I tried to stay out of that conversation because I knew my opinion was less cultivated.
One of the ideas that we'd been throwing around or tossing around was the idea of coming up with several different, well, at least exterior looks. and holding another forum, for lack of a better person, like upstairs, and inviting everybody, what do you like about this? What do you like about that? What don't you like about this? You know, maybe variations on the interior layout. Just, you know, is that a way to be able to get that kind of focus or community buy-in that would maybe bring this across that divisive divide?
And before you answer that, we certainly were well advised that you know, design by committee is death. So that sounds a little bit. I'm giving you an easy way out if you need it.
You know, basically asking you, you know, can you provide that kind of thing, or would that be the right way to, you know, to go?
I don't think it would be, no. And I don't, form does follow function, you know, and so in a sense, the program is going to generate how it looks, the site's going to generate how it looks. Massing and, you know, and then, you know, sure, you can decorate it a lot of different ways. Our approach was to say, this is a new building, or if it had been built, it would be a new building. So it should be of our time, but it should respect the fact that it's in a historic context, the village center. So we try to mediate the scale to be in context with the scale as best possible, even though it's a bigger building. The roof pitch, and even your own zoning ordinances sort of predicate certain pitches. And so we're walking this fine line between it's new and it should look new, but it's in a historic context, so it should have reference to that. If that's the wrong approach, I don't know what is. And should, you know, seriously. And then, you know, should it have a cupola or a clock tower? To me, that's, you know, that's money taken away from programs, you know, and the programs were what we were trying to accomplish. And, you know, so I'm not sure how we could approach it with a different philosophy. We might come up with some different results as the program changes, but the philosophy is making the best program, the adjacencies, the sizes, all of the things that make a library work. That creates basically that, you know, that creates a volume of building within the constraints of a site, sloping site. It's nice to have a children's garden. It's nice to have a place to enter. It's nice to have an entrance porch. Things that are functional. My feeling about sort of putting several options and letting the public decide would be as confused as ever. And it might be as adversarial as ever, because somebody's going to want this and somebody's going to want that. What you want everybody is pulling together, we want a good library, you know, and that's what's important for this community, not whether, you know, I get my way because it has square columns or round columns. So did that answer your question?
I certainly addressed it, yes.
Okay.
I think, and just to add on to that, I think that the building is going to take on a certain appearance based on the size and the form of it and what we call the massing. And you know, that's sort of how we start with a project. We're building the massing of it. We're building the shape and the form. And then from there, you know, then it's like, what are the materials? How big are the windows? So those are scale items. So then you start getting into, you know, the more finer grain of how it actually looks like. And I think that in some ways we were kind of pushed to make a lot of decisions very quickly because we were supposed to come up with a rendering. Our approach is to actually back off and have less information, because at that point you have more options. And so we were just talking about how almost a white model is almost a better approach, because it gives you more opportunities. I think that maybe the rendering style or the presentation style sort of forced us to make some decisions that maybe maybe people reacted to in a way that if it was just a form, a model, then maybe it would have been.
That you could take the roof off, because I've always wanted one that you
Yeah,
could take the
of
roof
course.
off and see the
Yes,
rooms down in
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Put the roof back on.
I mean, it still at some point has to become a building, so you still have to make those decisions. But I'm just wondering, you know, because I did these presentations, and you know, maybe somebody didn't like my trees, you know, or you know, they really like the car or the people. You know, people. It's funny how people have reactions to the rendering style, too. And whereas when you're building making a design, you're building a form. Does that make sense?
Let me follow up with that, because I want to ask, would that be a process that you would advocate to go through, you know, for us to take it to the voters? In other words, just to do the interior space, design the program, make it work well, and then just have it in a you know, without the exterior accoutrements, so to speak, just have a plain white box and show it to people, say, we'll figure that out later. This is the important thing that you have to look at. Is that something that could possibly work? I don't know. I think the public is, for better or worse, is very fixated. They want to see the pretty picture. And that's, I think, where we got into a little bit of trouble last time. So is that a process that you might have seen work someplace else, where you can just go that first?
Oftentimes, not so much now because the computer technology has changed, but we always built a cardboard model. And just the scale of it, you can't put a lot of detail in a cardboard model. It's this big, you can't do the bricks, or it's a white cardboard box, basically. And we usually put it in the context of the village or something, show the other scale things. But it's really a massing study, and you know, we haven't gotten into what kind of roof shingles they are, or what color the lobby is, or any of that. It's just, this is the massing of the building.
Is that an exercise you went through the last time around?
On this library?
Yeah.
No, we didn't. We went right, because we were sort of like, what's it look like? What's it look like? We didn't do that. And Cynthia and I both thought that, you know, maybe that would have been a smarter approach, but we sort of, you know, we've got, we're in this digital world where everybody wants photoreal renderings almost before you've had a chance to really contemplate the reality that you're rendering. So.
Maybe I have a question about timeline. Does from now until November, knowing full well that we would have to have certain things finished by X amount of weeks before November, but I mean, knowing what you know about this project and this community and more about this board now, what are your thoughts about shooting for October to have a lot of things figured out and be comfortable to bring something to the voters?
I think there's plenty of time for the site planning and architecture
Because
to
the
happen.
last time, we really, and we did it on purpose, we were trying to get something to the voters, and so I think we really rushed you all.
The mediation part is the part I don't know, the timing of that. I really do think that's an important part of this. I can't imagine sort of just doing this in the same climate and coming up with different results. You know, maybe we could do a library that comes in between 2.8 and 3.5 million. How do we know somebody's going to weigh that? And if we're going to do it, it's going to be a good library by our definition of good. We have no guarantee that anybody's going to like the way it looks. I mean, can you tell us what it should look like?
No.
Seriously.
Seriously, don't ask me, I'm like Ben.
I mean, does
I
anybody
agree.
know what this should look? I mean, if appearance is the most important thing, we either have to change that that sort of goal, that appearance isn't the most important thing, it's a good library that's the most important thing, or somebody tell us what appearance. I mean, we can keep drawing within the context of a volume that makes a good library with roof pitches and appropriate. We could decorate that box ad infinitum, and no guarantees. And really, in a way, I don't think the decorating of the box is relevant to passing, because that process is done over a bunch of time, maybe a year of working on drawings and details and getting lots of input. But we were kind of trying to, you know, make it look finished when we were still, those details needed to be thought through: window size, scale, proportion, material. You know, it would have been much better to have more time. We usually do have a lot more time.
So you felt kind of forced to do things in an order that you wouldn't have chosen the last time around?
In terms of appearance, you know, that the appearance was way too fast and too important.
Well, if we go through and do a white cardboard box and take care of the budget piece and the programming piece and the interior flow of space and things like that, and maybe we take the appearance off the table for the vote. I don't know. I have no idea how that would work, whether voters would just say, I'm not going to vote for it because I don't know what it looks like, or some people will say, I mean, for some people, and we don't know, because there were different people voted no for different reasons, and we don't necessarily know how many. For some people, if we can lower the budget from 4 to 3, that's a big deal for them, on what they're going to have to pay in their taxes. For some people, if we can provide a little more quality parking by being able to use a little bit more Memorial Park, we want to maintain the memorials, but one of the things that we sort of tacitly agreed on is in our board is that, okay, if we have to sacrifice more of the park for parking, then that's something we're willing to consider. So I don't know. I guess that's an interesting question as to whether we can go through this process and come up with a new design, a new budget and things like that, and leave the appearance for later. I don't know how the voters would react to that. Makes sense to me. But,
Particularly, I think the difficult, and I don't know the answer to this, but I think the difficulty is that has the horse already left that barn? You know, are the voters gonna be expecting that in, you know,
Can you define that?
a conceptual a rendering of what the
Elevation.
exterior would look like. I don't know, you know, unless possibly, you know, an approach with mediation, we could kind of get back on what the focus is, because I think largely, we still have a large group of people in town that are supportive of the library and that want to get a library built on both sides of the question. You know, I think there is still a really good, strong group that we can get 60% of the voters. If we could get them to kind of focus in on a solution, I think 60 to maybe even 70% of the voters would support, they want a library. There's not that many people that say that they don't want a library. I mean, there's some, but.
Well, there are some. Can I be really blunt and ask you, because you came at it from a lot of library experience, and B, from not being a Rockport resident. Did a portion of the focus groups feel as much like people were looking for excuses not to support it or not to like it? Or is it just the personalities of I don't like that, and I'm not going to, you know, I'm going to tell you till.
I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you?
Well, there are people in the world who will pick on little things, but what they really mean is, I don't support a library at all, or I don't support something big about this library, but they'll have a long discussion about the, you know, the granite lip above the window or something, but that's not what they're really saying. And maybe it's not an important question, but it does eventually go to in our minds, bolstering the need for a mediation of the process or of the expectations or whatever. And I think that's a really good idea. And maybe we want to state it even more strongly because of your observations of how those kind of focus group meetings went, if you could compare them to other communities' focus groups. But it sounds as though other communities didn't, you were just dealing with committees.
And often
Whip that baby right around there.
the committee would, like at Cape Elizabeth,
Right,
the
the
committee went out and did the focus groups, and it was really a fundraising effort at that point. It wasn't the focus groups deciding what color the windows are, what color the siding. It was, you know, this is what the committee's come up with this, you know, with our involvement, obviously, but, and we're trying to raise this much money. The public referendum is gonna be this much, and we're gonna fundraise X amount, and that's what they were out. They weren't I mean, sometimes we'd trickle back and say, you know, did we consider something? But it wasn't designed by the public at large. And that sort of talks to, I don't know, you know, with all due respect, I think you'd have so many different opinions that it would, you know, it would be, and you'd end up not pleasing everybody or anybody. I don't know.
Maybe
It's-
you end up displeasing more people than we
and
please.
I think that's what in some ways, that's what happened at the focus groups. It was people that, whatever, and I can't answer your question as to what their issues were, but it
Jeff?
was negative.
I think that there was only really one focus group that I remember that I think they just didn't want a library at all. The other ones, it was hard to tell. I mean, I think a lot of them understood, they liked the way the library worked on the inside. I think a lot of those were more, there was one that really stuck out of my mind. I think Ben remembers it too, where, you know, that's when I said, well, what do you guys want? And nobody could really tell me. I said, is there any buildings that you like that you could, you know,
Point to
that, you know, because I think sometimes that's helpful. Like, is there what's your favorite building in Rockport? What's your favorite building in Rockland or in Maine? And so there wasn't anybody in that meeting. But I think the other ones, most of them did like the idea of a library. But again, getting back to this, in our experience, we usually don't do focus groups in this detail. And I think that in going forward, we probably wouldn't recommend it, just because it needs to get filtered down. It's like any other kind of resource that it's too much information. Usually the committee helps us in that process, and there's sort of the committee acts more as the interface between the community.
How long did Cape Elizabeth allocate for those, the committee to the people?
This is your own now. And then Dick, you gotta own that.
You gotta be on the,
Yeah.
You should see him in a select board meeting.
well,
I almost have you guys trained.
I'll take a little longer, I'm sure, but I don't remember exactly. I know we had to work really hard to kind of get a design worked out and a budget, and we had a construction manager produce the budget. So it was a firm budget when they went to the voters.
We had actually full working drawings by the time we went to the voters, so they asked us to do a full set of construction drawings. So there was a planning committee that we worked with initially, and that was just a series of plans. There wasn't any pretty picture at all. And from there, the city council accepted the project, and then we did, I'm correct? No. And then from there, they hired us to do a full set of working drawings, which had a not-to-exceed budget attached to it.
The duration of time, might have been a year or something like that.
Yeah, it was at least a year. For the full working drawings, it was a year.
We had to produce the information, get a cost estimate, and then they took that, the committee went out and fundraised. It was largely, I think it was about a $4 million project, but it was all voter-approved money. The fundraising was for the furnishings, so it wasn't a large fundraising chunk. It was, I think, they aimed for 500,000, and they raised 750,000 for furnishings or something.
One important distinction is when we did our pretty picture, our rendering, it was based on working drawings. So that was real information. That had been processed over a time span of a year. So we really knew that building, and we could render it in a way that made sense. So it was a really fully developed building. And I think then when it went to the voters, it looked real, because it had been. We had worked on it for a whole year with the committee.
And what, if I can ask, Cape Elizabeth, it failed once and then passed a second time. What changed between the failure and the passage?
The architect? No.
That's part of it. The first time, they were going to tear down 2 historic buildings and put in this enormous one-story structure. We came in with a proposal to keep both of the historic structures and add on to one of them. And the other one became a freestanding building. And it went from about a $7 million project to about a $4 million project. And it was historically the right thing to do. We did, and there was a lot of other amenities of open pathways to the school, and it solved a lot of problems. So I'm not sure if it was just a better idea or the fact that we went from 7 million to 4 million.
So
on it.
reduced cost, but also a fairly significant change.
Total
in the
different project, yeah.
And we were saving a building that was really important to the community that was worth saving.
And my question is, you mentioned they gave you a not-to-exceed number. Can you talk about, like, when you're given a not-to-exceed number, what does that do to your thought process, and where did you end up hitting that number or below?
The not-to-exceed number that Cynthia mentioned was really, we completed a full set of documents, and there was a construction manager that had gone through an interview process and was hired. So they gave the not-to-exceed number.
Gotcha.
And it was based on, the committee sort of was saying, if we could cap it at 4 million, that's a good number. We shouldn't have a hard time getting voter approval on that. So we were aiming at that number, but the actual not-to-exceed number was after going through this long design process. And part of that process was, it was, 4.8, or, remember we had to go through they quote value engineering process of
At what part of the process did the construction manager come on board to kind of
Pretty
work
early.
closely with
design
you all?
Pretty
development.
early,
We were-
yeah.
Before their bond was passed?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
really?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I think
And
the
they had
to-
a fee. If it didn't pass, they got a fee, and if it passed, the fee got rolled into the project. But in our case, it would be might not be a illogical next step to have a construction manager.
Yeah, I think the schedule went in Cape Elizabeth, we did a planning session, I think it was in the fall. And then, like in, maybe it was December, or early November, we were brought on to do the construction drawings. And, within a couple weeks, maybe it was New Year's, that's when the construction manager was brought in to work alongside with us as we continued the design process. And then we did the renderings in the summertime after the drawings were pretty much done. And then there was a period of sort of promoting it in the summer with brochures and that sort of stuff, and it was on the referendum in November. So it was a full year worth of work.
So I have my own perception that, for whatever reason, the board has throughout this evening has been approaching you with would this work, would this work? Understanding that the last proposal didn't pass. We don't know exactly why it didn't pass. But we have a perception that cost was part of it and aesthetics was part of it. Can you describe the process and the sequence that makes the most sense to you? There's a piece that you've introduced tonight about mediation, which is very interesting, and I don't think anybody else has actually raised that. I assume that's either the first or amongst the earliest elements. Can you, and this may not be fair to ask you to ad-lib this right now, but if you feel like you can knock off the punch list that you think, you know as much about this community as any architect who isn't from here could know. Do you feel like you could describe the sequence of events that has the best chance of being successful?
I think some sort of mediation is, some way to sort of get the focus back on things that are rational and achievable would be, and then the architect could respond to those. Knowing why it didn't pass would be, that would be a really valuable piece of information. Is it?
If you can find that,
Well,
let us know.
Yeah, I don't know. So it's a shame to guess at that because, and it didn't pass by not very much, so, why that,
Is it possible to do a survey monkey and I don't know.
This has been a conversation
Right.
they had.
Okay.
been there. That's
All right, you've been
all
there.
right.
All
Same
right.
thing.
And certainly, I have to be on the other side. I understand where you're coming from. I happen to be of the opinion that the ways in which you might collect that information are not going to be as definitive
Okay.
as you would like them to be.
Okay.
And so there is a time cost component with that. I just don't, it's just, the others have their own assessment.
So if there was a process by which there was mediation and it got focused on things that are achievable, things you could actually, more of this and less of this, and, a clock tower or not a clock, anything that, we could actually use as a design tool, element to design to. But I think the process has to generate a lot of excitement. Ben has to be really excited about whatever we come up with, because the one thing you don't want to have happen is finish the library and some patron goes in and the staff says, yeah, this doesn't work and this doesn't work. That just is, and I've been in libraries where that, not ones that we've done, but that I go to a lot of libraries and I've heard that. So sort of going through a design process again, looking for efficiencies, looking at, fine-tuning the collection, fine-tuning program, and reducing the size seems like a logical next step, because it would that would help the cost factor. If it's too expensive, then it would be less expensive, and that's usually a pretty popular, as long as it's an exciting library still. And, if it got down, this is what really worries me. If we do all of that hard work and it's still about appearance, then I don't think, then it's just a crapshoot, seriously.
But your perception is that you can, or perhaps your perception, your experience has been that elsewhere you can generate that kind of excitement without communicating exterior detail.
We have, I mean, yeah, a lot of libraries, we haven't had that level of exterior detail.
Kind of sounds like your wow factor comes from process more than end product. Sometimes.
Right.
You get people excited by walking through a very specific process.
Well, we get a library committee and a library staff excited, and they, they pass that excitement into the community, into the patrons.
Make it happen better.
I tried. I was super
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
was
you
in
were.
people's homes. I loved that building.
Have any
Yeah.
other towns that you've worked with? I mean, because it sounds to me like what we need to do is, we need to inform and educate our citizens as to what a library is and should be, and what they should really be focusing on when they make their decision. Have you dealt with any other towns that have engaged some other professionals in that realm to help with that messaging?
We brainstorm a little bit. Now, other than that situation on Peaks Island and the affordable housing, we haven't really. Before we even hired on Cape Elizabeth, Steve Pagioni did sort of a focus, big town-wide thing. But the funny thing is, the outcome of it is, if you'd gone by the outcome of that focus thing, it was pretty much everybody decided we should have tear everything down and build a new library, which is the opposite thing we actually came up with. So, case in point, I don't know, you never know. The information coming out of small and large focus groups might not necessarily be the best library.
When Steve did that, how many sessions did he hold, and about how many people were
Just
brought
one.
in?
It was
It was a-
one, we actually attended it.
It was a school cafeteria, and it broke into, boy, there must have been 10 or 20 little focus groups
Oh.
at one time around, and then they got up and each shared their information, from.
So they had a healthy turnout then.
They did, they had
Yes.
a healthy turnout,
I
and there
bet it was 100
in-
people there, you
in-
think, or
Yeah, there was
almost,
a
yeah.
healthy turnout. They broke into small groups, and we attended. It was before they hired the architects, and we thought, well, we'll just go and learn what we can. And but I think the outcome was a much bigger library again. I mean, it was sort of skewed. The people that showed up all wanted a library, so it skewed to a bigger library. And I think, I don't know how we got our marching orders for it to be a smarter order library, but I don't remember how that happened. I think we
I think
just,
we sort of
we
took
we
the-
just said,
Looked
really
at
needs
the
to be.
collection and
Yeah,
the
we looked at the
program and
collection
said,
and just
"Yeah,
said
I
it
don't
needed to
know
be
if we need all that
smaller,
space," yeah.
so.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I know. I think they had a budget. That's how it came.
Yeah, that was the factor.
That's the big thumb.
Well, yeah.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. But it was before they even contracted with you.
They had that group, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
It was right after the referendum had failed, and so there was a library planning committee that was trying to figure out the next steps, sort of what's going on here. So they decided to have a focus group meeting.
And remember, there's been various levels of that kind of work that has gone on for 5 years, I believe, here. Starting with the, Imagine the Possibility, was it the Imagine the Possibilities thing, Grant?
Yep.
And then we had the listening tour with Jane Haskell from Unity College that came in, and Steve Pagoni also came in and helped us. I think the mediation piece is, recognizing we've got this obstacle to get over, and how do we get over it? And I'll go back to, I think a large portion of people want a good library, and if we can design a good library, Ben and the staff will make it a great library. If we can get to a good library, they'll get us to the great library. I'm confident of that, but we have to get the good library built for that to happen.
I mean, I don't mind saying that personally, I have a hard time imagining community buy-in without the level of exterior detail, and I do some of that kind of work myself, so I'm very sensitive to what happens when a client locks on to something that you couldn't leave it blank, and all of a sudden it causes trouble for you. I get that. I noticed that, or at least my perception is that you place a greater emphasis on the interior, function, and wonder, have you in the past been prompted to provide that kind of rendering information from the inside as opposed to the exterior? Or is it equally
interesting.
problematic at that stage in the project where you don't have working drawings to work from? Is it equally difficult to provide?
That's
There's- For the interior to be decided upon, there's maybe even more decisions than the exterior. So, you would want to, at Cape Elizabeth, we had interior renderings, but as Cynthia said, we were pretty much done with the design. It was,
Yeah.
we knew, what color the granite floors were. We knew, what the
We could
buttons on
pick
the
the
elevator
carpet.
looked like. So we had the carpet all selected, so we could do interior, we could be pretty
Confident.
confident in what we were rendering. So, does it make sense to go through another process and do a complete design? Spend a year getting a complete design so you can do that level of rendering and then go to the voters? I mean, that's what Cape did. They just were so sure that it would pass.
Mm-hmm.
And it did by a large majority, so, but I'm not, in this environment, I'm not sure that would be,
Wise, yeah.
it'd be a higher risk.
Yep.
Because less unanimous support of the library. It's more diverse, I think, or at least based on the voting that we heard. But we would need that level of detail to do a valid interior rendering. And then if it got down to, well, I really don't like red, or I really don't like blue, and I'm not gonna vote for your library because I don't like red, then we've wasted a ton of time and money.
I had a question earlier, Brendan. You said you knew what would pass.
I certainly didn't. It sounds like Dick got that as well.
I
I wrote it down because I'm like,
That's really,
whoa.
That's really not what I meant, and I apologize if I said that. When I came back to asking you about the process, we've not done the survey that you described. So not only do we not know what will pass, but we don't know exactly why it didn't pass. I think each of us has some individual and some shared general impressions or convictions about some of the ingredients. And I think, as I said, I lobbied against doing that, taking the time to do that survey kind of effort, in part because of the way I've seen our community react to information collected in that way. So I definitely don't know what will pass. My observation is that there were elements to why it did not pass, but that's not factually or evidence-based. It's perception. And so for me, it felt to me like the best we might do is validate that the programming effort was prepared appropriately and thoroughly, but try and refer back to some of those reasons we think it didn't pass and try and move the needle in the right direction on multiple fronts.
Maybe I'll throw out a different direction. It's weird when you hear yourself. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed kind of understanding the process better as, taught to me by professionals. And so I would love to continue working with you all on this. But that's kind of the big reason that we're here tonight. Do we stay with you all through this process or move on? So I'm going to try to ask some more questions just to get to know you all better and what you're thinking about this project. And what I'd like to hear is when you got the email from us asking you to see if you wanted to build a library again for a divorcing couple, what were your thoughts?
Good question. Mixed thoughts, and one of the things that I would want was, thanks.
Thank you.
One of the things I would want is some sense that work would be done to sort of on the community, because, I think that's really key. And I don't know, it's not the work we do, so it's easy, it's both easy and difficult to sort of envision what that would be, but that would be criteria number one. And Cynthia said we probably wouldn't do any more focus. I don't think I would do another focus group because I don't think it was productive, and it was, it's fairly painful sort of process.
One thing that maybe it helps, I don't know if you all see, we, the select board, are trying to take more of a leadership role here. So it's not other people that we've asked to do work for us getting beat up by the public. If someone's gonna get beat up, it should be the select board.
No, but, I mean, so when I was there at those, it struck me as a series of charrettes where only one part of the group had been through a charrette and knew what a charrette was for. And the other reason for doing that kind of thing, if it wasn't to have a real charrette, which I don't think you can have if half of the audience doesn't know how those things work, is the kind of thing that's supposed to happen behind a one-way mirror. Sort of just really truly putting something in front of an audience without getting to shape the conversation at all and just record what the reaction was. So I agree with you that process was challenging, I thought.
Well, it obviously didn't produce the result we were hoping for. It was challenging, but that's only one part of it. It really didn't produce consensus in a community that approved a library. That's really the tragic part of it, I think.
If we could have gotten constructive criticism, we would have been fine with it. I mean, I think, Dick and I, we're trained to take criticism. That's what we do. But it needs to be constructive, and it needs to be in a format that we can incorporate it into a response. And I think that's where it failed. We weren't able to incorporate it into a response that made sense because it was coming from all different directions. So it's not that we don't like criticism. It's always a dialogue, and that's what I think we're very successful at, is responding to a committee. But once you get beyond 10 to 15 people, it's too cumbersome. So I think I applaud you for saying that you're going to take that leadership role, because I think that's a strong position to take, whether it's us or somebody else.
Did you finish your thought?
I've got another thought too. I mean, I've got thoughts of go-go.
Don't egg them on.
That's why I'm here.
No, I thought maybe Brendan sort of interrupted your train of thought there.
It's
No,
fine.
Okay. Did you want, okay. So I think if I understand this, what we're talking about really is, before we go further, we really need to get the sense of our community. Figure out what, and filter that, before we really try to move forward any further, and then maybe, if we follow the Cape Elizabeth example, establish a budget at that point, and then bring in an architect, construction manager, whatever, to actually put those into a set of drawings that can easily be explained, rendered, displayed, tweaked. But what we need is a much larger budget to be able to do all of that,
To have that
particularly,
level of detail, yeah.
get to that level of detail.
And do you want to risk that? I mean,
Yeah. Well, for point of argument, what would you think would be something, right now we're talking, anywhere from 2.8 to 3.5, but what would you think that initial cost should be allocated at? Not to build it, but through that, level of design
we could let
tried.
you know. We'd have to
Okay.
think about that. That's
Well,
it's a very valid question. We just have to give it some more thought.
right.
The answer is $1 million.
Oh,
If
you
we're
know,
going to be unfair asking questions, you can give us
Well-
an unfair answer.
Well, this thing about why didn't it pass? What would happen? I mean, we went through a pretty valid and productive and successful process with Ben, the staff, and the committee to kind of arrive at a solution that was a certain size, and there was a dollar sign attached to it. What if this got voted down and didn't have anything to do with that? I mean, wouldn't it be a shame to go through a process to reduce this if that wasn't the reason it got voted down? It just got voted down again. And we probably hit a sweet spot in that where the program we came up with. It was, we've looked at it from all different angles, and it shrunk. We kept tweaking that till I think we made almost everybody happy as much as we could have.
Yeah, I was at, I think, all of the meetings that the group had. And, when the discussions were about program, and you guys were working on program, there were some difficult discussions, but they all seemed to produce something at the end. and in the end, everybody could look at the program and say, and Ben says this often, is that was our opportunity for the best library that we could produce. And, there was differences of opinion on the committee, but the conversation was really productive. Where it kind of fell apart was when we got into the appearance piece. And that was where it was very difficult to solve all that, all those questions. I mean, the thing that you would think would be the hardest, you actually, the committee and you guys actually accomplished. It was difficult, but you got through that piece. It was, when it came to the windows, the shape of the roof, that's where it kind of, went off the tracks a little bit, and as you said, that's the harder thing to answer, for us.
I don't know that you really know that, Rick, right? I mean, certainly we heard that opinion from some individuals, but we don't have a why attached to all the no votes. So,
but I'm just saying about the conversation that was that when it got to that conversation in the focus groups, most of the focus groups were focused on the way it appeared, not on the interior space.
That's true.
Here's a random question, because there was a pause. And maybe this is one for each of you. What was your favorite project that you worked on? Why? And what was the result? I'm trying to get to know the people that we're going to be dealing with. The best project you ever worked on?
Well, I think that the Carabasset Library project was a great project that we worked on. And that was a committee of about 20 people. It was a big committee. And it had a lot of components to it because it had a children's childcare and a community center and a library. So it was very complex programmatically. We were dealing with the community because a lot of people in the community didn't want to have a childcare facility that was other than what's up at the mountain. But a lot of that piece was all done kind of without our knowledge. That was all worked on, so we didn't really have to deal with that piece. We just got to go to the committee meetings and design a building, and they love the building. I mean, we go back up, and I've stopped by a couple times, and the librarian is just so excited because they never really had a library that functioned there, and there was a person on the committee, they ended up doing some of the interiors because they didn't have the funding to do that, and it's a beautiful library, and they're very, very proud of it, and it works really well as a childcare facility and as a community center, so it was fun. I think the end result was really fun. Every time I stop by, it's been a great project, so.
I have a hard time picking a favorite, but the last library was Cape Elizabeth, so I think I said it at the interview, your newborn child gets the attention, and it's a little bit of that. I mean, we solved a lot of problems and we're able to sort of retrieve a lot of amenities that were hidden there. And so I look at that and think, nobody's really going to know what we did here, but it was quite an accomplishment at Cape Elizabeth.
One of the things we did was we actually lowered the floor of the existing building, so because one of the obstacles of the existing school was that the ceiling heights were quite low, but we were able to lower.
We raised the
No,
floor.
we raised the
Yeah,
second floor. We raised the second. We changed the floor heights
cool.
of the building, and you don't really. Most people going in the building would never notice it, but it totally transformed the building, and it was just it was one of those things you woke up in the middle of the night, right? And it said, oh, we could, raise the ceiling height. And so things like that, really being able to be clever. And
we came up with this circulation pattern of strong axis for when you enter, and on both floors. And it was an old school, had been renovated a few times, had been tacked onto. So when they did the demolition, exactly where we were deciding to put a new opening, there was a bricked up opening. It's just like, it certainly resonated with this building in ways that it was almost gives me goosebumps sometimes, that it just worked really well, both as a building, on the site too. The old buildings were connected in some ways, so you had no connection to the elementary school right nearby. So now, this lower level that we were able to make daylight by raising the ceiling height. The children's room looks out into a children's garden and looks out into the elementary school. So the connection is just, it just works, you know. And the elementary school is there. We didn't create it. We just were able to take advantage of only a 4-foot slope of land to get daylight in a children's room that looks over a garden into the elementary school. And the kids from the elementary school come back and forth, you know, through, because there's a circulation desk control point. Anyway, things like that just seemed all to start to fall into place in ways that were really exciting.
What's interesting, if you look at Carrabassett Valley and you look at Cable Elizabeth, they look completely different. They're completely different buildings because they responded to the site, they responded to the
What I do now. function
and the form. You know, the Carrabassett Library has a sloping roof that slopes up towards the mountain, so when you're in the library, your focus is on the mountain, you see the mountain. Cape Elizabeth, it's you're looking at the playground. So, I mean, so we don't have a set design and this is, you know, cookie cutter, you know. We were responding to the community, and they had two different responses, very, very different.
So to bring us back to Rockport, our site is small, as you know. And if we ask you, you know, if we continue with you and ask you to do something that reduces the size a little bit, not dramatically, are you inclined to start over again? Are you inclined to capture a large part of the elements that you had the first time around? Like I say, I asked the question because the site is small. There aren't that many options there. But I just sort of digging into your mind a little bit to see what your thought might be.
I think we would capture, you know, we would springboard from what we've already done and start looking, like I say, at efficiencies and you know, kind of tweaking it. Because I don't think we were off. I do not think we were off, but it produced a certain cost, and if the cost is one of the reasons it got voted down, then we need to look at things that would reduce the cost. And that, though, you know, would be a close relationship working with Ben and the committee to, you know, the select board, to make sure that they know what they're losing, what they're gaining or losing in that equation. In other words, to give you information, to make informed decisions.
Tell me your favorite Ben story. I mean, I love this guy, but
Yeah.
you got a chance to work with him more closely. Like, what was your when Ben's face lit up and he got his aha moment?
Okay.
Aha moment.
No, you don't have to do it again.
I don't have a favorite Ben story. I really appreciate his enthusiasm, and I've told him he has very keen instincts. I mean, we've worked with a lot of library directors, and you know, you have a real asset here. I mean, in terms of he gets it, and that's why it's a little surprising. You know, Ben worked really hard on the solution we came up with. Cynthia and I and a team of consultants, you know, Mike King, worked really hard on it. We all have libraries way up in our, you know, value system, and we produced a good library. Isn't it a shame it got voted down? Because you know, for what reason? Because who that voted against it knew more about libraries than this group that worked hard on it? I mean, really hard on it. So it's a little disappointing that it got voted down because it was a good effort. And I'm not saying that because we were involved. It really was. It was a good solution.
Yeah, I guess I would like to know who voted, if they vote why. You know, the why is a big question, because, you know, we would respond to that if we knew why.
Yeah, to speak to that, I mean, one of my favorite things about working with these people was how responsive it was back and forth. I mean, often I would get these designs and they'd show up in my inbox and it would be like, what do you think? Talk to us about this. And I'd sort of look through it, troubleshoot things that we didn't think were right. We'd crunch things, we'd look at it. I'd, by the end of the day, send something back to them, and sometimes I'd have something new the next morning. And that was a fairly intense process that went on for a good 2 to 3 weeks, but it was, you know, there was a beat to it, and it was really nice to have that give and take and to sort of be in that trusted relationship. It was really nice to do that.
What do you want to ask us?
What are you going to do?
That's the big question.
That's a good question, and I think one of the most valuable things that has come out of this last hour or so, for me, is that we were all on a speeding train, you know, and we had we had markers coming up, and, oh, can we get June, can we get November? Originally that, was because we didn't want to be on the same ballot as the middle school, and we're looking at this and that and the other thing. But I think that's really important, and as one of the early advocates for a survey, which I gave up with, and then took an entirely different tack, and that didn't work either. I think that this board should, at this meeting or another meeting, consider commissioning a good written, a survey that does what we want, because this whole idea that surveys don't tell us anything is crap. And
Excuse me, watch your
I'm
language.
sorry, is not
Always
as,
have.
yeah.
Baloney is a good word.
Malarkey.
But, the computer versus non-computer versus mail to everything, hand it out to everybody who comes to vote in June. They're there, we hand out the annual report, we hand out a survey with a self-addressed envelope back to the town offices at June election. Those are the people that vote, those are the people that we want to hear from. Now, there are taxpayers who are not, voting people and what have you, and their input may or may not be important, but to the point, to the question of why did someone vote yes, why did someone vote no, where do we go? We go to the people that vote. And so I think that's a very powerful theme that's come out of here, and it's one that I certainly, it's my starting place until it just doesn't get through the process. But
Well, and I also advocated hard for a survey, which I don't always do, and sometimes Jeff and I are on the opposite
sometimes their
tack
timing is
on
off.
those things, but I really want, and to the point where I actually I made a laundry list of reasons why people would have voted yes or no or whatever, and I had a long list of it and gave it to the board, and we thought about it. And this goes to your point or your observation, and it's an astute observation, I think, that we have the acrimony here, because when I finally threw up my hands when people said to me, it doesn't matter if you do the best survey in the world, I'm not going to believe it. And that was just so disappointing to me. It was really it was a gut punch. And I would love to be able to, maybe with a little bit of time now we can do it, because I do think we need to know why. Why did it fail? Why did people vote no? And like I say, I came up with a laundry list of reasons why people would have voted, and why people would have voted yes. I had the whole list there, and at least in my opinion, and I'd like to know, because I don't want to do a lot of work for
Right.
no result.
And the other thing is, you've already alluded to this, is that did they vote it down because it was too expensive? That's one of the reasons that I hold that 3.5, I'd go to 3.75 just to stretch that, because I don't want it to get, my guess is under 3 million, and it's not worth building. That we won't have a good enough program, enough anything, that why should Rockport bother to build a $3 million library? It sounds horribly obscene to some people who some people in this town just don't want to spend $1 on a library. But to that end, with a well professionally crafted, well worded, comprehensive survey, you can find those things out. You can find out what is the threshold for the biggest number of people and all of that. And so and what are the values? Totally away from what it looks like. You don't even put that in the survey, but what are the people's values? And we'll find out that 30% of the people don't value a library. Okay, so that's a knife to the chest. But of the people who would support it, what do they think? So I'm back on that
You
train.
give a completely different look to the idea of the survey when you come in and say, we hand it out at the election. We know it's in their hands then. I don't know if that gives us any better result, but it changes the whole perspective
Right,
to me,
right.
because I was opposed to it.
The naysayers you can have a code, you can have them actually fill it out online, but they have the physical thing. There's all kinds of things you can do. The naysayers that say it doesn't work because someone could vote twice or something, that's very easy. I mean, there are people that do that all the time. So I don't put much stock in that. Will people fill it out? I don't know the answer to that. But it's again, and as we've indicated, we're the people taking the hits. If we can't get, we had a phenomenal reply rate on the comprehensive plan survey, which was long, and we sent it out to every
registered landowner, I think.
probably to every house, every building. But in any event, and we got, I'm not going to guess, but I mean, memory suggests we got low 70%. So, but there we are.
I've got a question. So, again, because we're interviewing you, and one of the previous discussions that we had was around opening it back up to other architects. I personally feel very comfortable continuing on with you all, but I'm just one of 5. In the event that we were to invite other architects in, would that color your perception on wanting to continue forward on this project one way or the other?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And the reason for that, we gave it our best shot, and we did a good job. And, perfectly okay if that obviously didn't succeed in terms of passing a referendum. I still think it succeeded in terms of solving some very difficult design problems in terms of size and site and all of that. But we're perfectly okay with walking on. If you need to sort of start over here with somebody else, that's perfectly okay. But we're only interested in continuing a process that, as it's evolved and being part of it. And contingent upon the fact that some work is going to be done that isn't architecture, that is survey or mediation or something. I mean, that would be a criteria by which we'd want to continue. So we're sort of interviewing you too.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we need that outside looking in perspective, very much so.
I'm gaining a sense that we're sort of winding down here.
I do want to ask you from a procedural standpoint whether we're going to have any comments from the audience.
I hadn't planned on that, but what is the will of the rest of the board? Do we want to ask?
So I would place emphasis on procedure and what was the public told? I mean, anything one way or the other?
Well, it wasn't on the agenda. It is a meeting.
That's what it was. It was a meeting.
It's a meeting where we invite,
For that
It
reason,
wasn't
I'd be
excluded,
disinclined.
but it wasn't included either. So,
And I'm sorry,
I guess for that reason, I'd be disinclined to have public comment.
What I might suggest is that we continue our discussion Thursday, if that's acceptable, and invite public comment at that. Remember, we already set up to
I ain't
have.
taking that off my calendar. No, that's right. It's real easy. I'll put it right back on.
Well,
Wait a second, wait a second.
if you
Why'd
want to have more
why'd you take it
time,
off your calendar?
we've got.
Because there wasn't going to be a meeting with other
Yeah,
architects.
we set up effectively 4 sessions.
Right.
Tonight, Thursday, and then Monday and Tuesday, the 24th and 25th.
Okay, so I'm sorry, because just before, I want to go back to this whole idea of, because Dick and Cynthia are here, there may be pertinent questions. There is a wealth of both interest, obviously, and of experience in the audience right now. So I wanted to just finish that because only 2 people spoke up about whether we want to have anybody from the audience chime in.
I can go either way.
It's not 11 o'clock
It's
yet.
not 11 o'clock yet.
I say we have a Thursday meeting and allow public comments at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go along with
Yeah.
that.
I think we've asked them all the questions. I think now, and I think it's more, if people have an issue with Dick and Cynthia, it's really, they have an issue with us. And, we need to hear from them why they do or don't think that it would be appropriate. And if they have questions that really go to the process that you would go through you know, we could then send them back. But we have a very limited audience here tonight, and, you know, I'm sort of, the Tylenol's worn off. You know, Ken, do you think we have anything here on?
No, it wasn't on the agenda. I would be, and I'm not looking at the audience right now, so I don't know who's here. So that's.
There are no knives out
That
yet.
makes it easier.
Well, and actually, I don't want to look around and see, well, look at somebody in the eye and say, well, gee, I don't want him to talk, or I don't want him to talk, or whatever. So, I would be a little concerned that it would go a little long. Dick and Cynthia came a long distance to see us tonight, and I think we've had a very good conversation. So I would.
Okay.
I think they came to talk to us, and I don't know that we want to expand it beyond that.
Okay.
I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah, okay, then, really, you know,
Okay.
thank you very much. This has been very insightful, very helpful.
For having us.
Oh,
Any other
very
parting
much.
words?
yeah, do you,
Parting thoughts?
No, I hope you get a library built, though.
Are we adjourning?
do we have anything we need to discuss before we adjourn, or do you
Well,
want to
so
say
the-
something after?
Yeah, I want to follow him out.
Oh,
Chat.
okay, for that, I think that we can take the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move second, all in favor? Okay. Thank you very much, appreciate everybody's attendance and